from Kapstan, Ketch, and from Headlamp. So we can just go ahead and introduce ourselves. Like I said, I'm Chris. I work with Kapstan.
Sijang with Ketch.
And I'm Harshil. I work with Headlamp as a front-end engineer.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. So just a bit about setting the context, sort of the what and the why. Is the agenda. It makes sense. We'll go company by company. So first off, let's break down what we mean when we say auth. And so auth sort of has two contexts. It's authorization and authentication. And they're fairly connected and fairly similar, but different in sort of pretty big ways. So first, authentication. How do I know that you are who you say you are? For a services perspective, how can I trust that this user is the identity they're presenting? And then authorization, how do I determine what they can and can't access? And so the problem seems fairly simple, right? If we can just somehow get people to prove this validity, then we just check a table, see what they can access, and it's all good. But it comes with pretty big consequences. Anything to deal with authorization. If things go wrong, people get access to data they're not supposed to. Data gets treated in questionable ways. There's big fines. There's big headaches. And it becomes a lot more complicated. And there are some open standards in place that get used fairly often, and they're widely supported by the community. But as a developer, and specifically on a smaller team focused on building product, you don't want to spend your time researching and implementing all these standards yourself. And so the solution space, this is just sort of what we're talking about with authentication. You kind of have these username and password, fairly traditional standard methods. But in sort of modern applications, there's a lot of delegating to kind of third-party things. So for example, like a social authentication, when you sign in with Google, when you sign in with GitHub, that kind of thing. And it becomes more and more complicated to kind of integrate these in a seamless way and maintain them. And so just a quick little aside, pretty much everything we're going to talk about can be managed via infrastructure as code, which is just simplifying your life. And we're going to have a GitHub repo linked just to sort of show an example flow of how to set up some of these things. And so let's start with basics of what Auth0 is and sort of an interesting way we use it at Kapstan. And so Auth0 is essentially all of these problems we talked about managed and delegated to a third-party authenticator or auth as a service. So rather than you needing to manually implement sort of all of these open standards, implement how to connect all of these things, wire them all together, Auth0 gives you a platform that will do it for you and makes it extremely flexible, extremely easy to integrate with your services. And so like I said, it's an external auth-n and auth-z, so that's authentication and authorization service, aiming at minimizing developer effort. And as you'll see in this talk today, it really, really supports very high levels of customization so that it makes it so you can get a bare minimum product off the ground very fast. But as you grow and as your needs grow, it'll significantly shrink the time you need to invest to sort of augment it into these really feature-rich methods. And so quick talk about multi-tenancy. Essentially, it's this concept of using a shared backend for multiple different contexts or multiple different organizations, is the term you're going to hear a little bit now. And so in the context of authentication, me, for example, as a single user, I might be a part of multiple companies in Kapstan, for example, multiple teams. But I wouldn't want to have to create a new account for each team, because ultimately, I'm the same person in that app. And so I want to reuse my single identity across them. And so Auth0 supports this using organizations, which is fairly intuitive concept. On the screen, I just have two sample demo ones we use in our dev environment. But if I were to log in through one of the organizations, I would be the same identity, but have different permissions scoped there. And so I don't have to, as a developer, I don't have to maintain two Chris's. There is one Chris, and he has different permissions depending sort of where he is currently acting. And Auth0 makes it really, really easy to get all of this information validated and sort of sent to your backend using flows. Flows you can essentially think of as arbitrary node JavaScript code that gets executed based on certain event triggers. And so extremely flexible. And for instance, with organizations, you can make it so when people log in, this flow executes, queries for all their permissions, and sort of chucks them in the token that gets sent back to your services. So then rather than needing your service to check this every single time, you can say, oh, well, it came from Auth0. It came in this validated JOT, this web token. And so you can trust that that's fine, and you don't need any extra logic. And I'm going to pass it off to Harshal.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I'm just going to quickly talk about how we're using Auth0 and some of the offerings apart from what Chris said, like actions and flows and some other stuff at Headlamp. So just for some context before we move on, I think just want to talk about how onboarding, a customized version of onboarding can be done through Auth0. I mean, all the products across the Hive, they have different ways of onboarding different kinds of customers, be it a B2B or B2C, who have different ways of onboarding the customer. And I think a lot of flexibility is provided by Auth0 to do that. So just for some context around Headlamp, we have two portals. We have a provider portal and we have a patient portal. And the onboarding flows for both of them are pretty different, right? So I'm just going to go through those. So for example, over here, for a provider, so provider is essentially the psychiatrist or the therapist that where we onboard onto the platform so that they can start using our application. So it's pretty simple. You go through the sign up flow on the UI, you get an email, and through the email, you can just you can set a password for your account, and the provider is onboarded. They can now log into the app and start using it. For the patient, it's a bit of extra steps have to be taken. Patient essentially is added by the provider. They add a provider. The patient gets an email saying that, hey, you are invited to join Headlamp as a patient, right? And the same flow, they set a password. But after they set a password, they get a different screen where they can actually download the app, because essentially it's a different application altogether for the patient. So then they see a couple of buttons where they can sign up. And once they install the app, the onboarding experience on the app is also something which is a bit more nuanced, where for the first time that they log in, they have to verify who they are, or the contact information that the provider had entered when signing them up. So the first time they log in, they have to verify that, okay, the contact information is correct by entering a 6-digit code. And then the next set of logins, which is over here, they don't have to do that anymore. So it's more like a one-time multi-factor authentication thing. So yeah, I mean, just to set some context about how it works. And of course, the one thing is that when you are considering building your customized onboarding flows with Auth0, you have to also consider that at any point of time, you have to give any kind of user, be it a patient or a provider, you have to give them the ability to always forget, like if they forgot their password, they should have the ability to reset their passwords, right? Seems pretty straightforward, but in this case, what I wanted to kind of highlight on is that all of this can be achieved by not spending a lot of time and efforts, and even not adding more and more resources just to get all this set up. So this can literally can be done without any backend. So we at Headlamp, we haven't written a single endpoint single backend endpoint that to take care of this entire onboarding experience across both the portals, right? And how did we do that? So I think there are three important features of Auth0 that we have utilized very heavily over here to kind of get that done, which is, the first one is email customization, right? So generally, working with emails when you are setting up your backend is a real headache, because you have to consider the right templates, you have to consider the right triggers. Generally, a backend engineer is not very comfortable writing front-end code, right? So, I mean, you have to get your HTML right to get the templates right, and at the end, send the right triggers. But I think without any kind of backend, without taking up any backend engineer's time, I think we were able to set this up. So let me talk about all of these three a bit into detail. So email customization. So like I was saying, Auth0 provides heavy email customizations, right? So during your entire authentication, your authorization flows, your onboarding flows, you can send a lot of, there's a lot of different kinds of triggers that help you send emails, and they also have this really, really intuitive way to set up your email templates so that you can make it more personalized. And I think that they're doing it through liquid syntax. So I'm not sure if a lot of people know about what liquid syntax is. Liquid syntax is generally supported across a lot of SaaS apps where they have when you want to do a lot more customization that is kind of embedded within your scripts, right? And yeah, the 4 use cases that we are using here. So I mean, yeah, so what happens is we're using one single template to kind of personalize emails for 4 different use cases, which is we send a welcome email with a password set link for the provider, another one for the patient, and the same forgot password links for the provider and patient, all through a single template. So if I just show it to you very quickly. So yeah, here it is, right? So this is an email template. These are the different kinds of templates that you can customize very heavily. For example, your verification email, your welcome email, MFA email. So in this case, what we wanted to achieve was there were 2 flows, right? The first flow is that, okay, the first time the user signs up, they want to set the password. So that's a welcome email, but that's internally that's using setting up of a password. And the second is if they actually forget a password, they should see the email to set the password, right? So over here, if you see, this is what the liquid syntax that I was talking about. So over here, we have a bunch of if-else conditions to kind of get these 4 use cases wired up inside a single template. And I think all of these fields here itself support a lot of liquid syntax, which you can use to ultimately customize and personalize your email templates as much as you want. And in the end, the good part, the content, right? Over here, if you see, there again, a lot of if-else conditions, just a bunch of if-else conditions, and then you can just go wild with your imagination and just write the right kind of templates to be able to edit this. So it makes it very flexible. So for example, our designer wanted to make some changes inside the email template. So without having to reach out to any of the developer, he could just go to the portal and just play around with the colors or play around with some stuff and just some basic stuff. Okay, hey, I want to change how the email looks for the provider, right? So he can pretty easily reset that. Okay, this is the kind of template. This is the template that's going to be rendered if it's a provider, right? So this is the kind of heavy customization that through a single template you can do on Auth0 itself without having to write any endpoints or without having to write any kind of triggers manually on the backend, right? So I think the next one is universal login. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys already, if you're using Auth0, you might already know about what universal login is and how Auth0 kind of promotes more and more to use universal login. So I mean, universal login is essentially kind of like a page that Auth0 promotes that, okay, instead of using your own login page, why don't you use ours? Like that's hosted on your domain, of course. Why don't you use ours? And that gives you a lot more flexibility to work with Auth0, right? And it looks seamless. It doesn't look like there's a redirect and all of that. It's pretty seamless that way, right? So we have utilized that very heavily to kind of make sure that when the user is on the link where they are, the first experience that they get when they get on the platform and they're like, okay, I'm signing up for Headlamp, so I want the experience to be good, right? Or even as a patient, if I'm setting a password, I want the experience to be pretty good, right? So we've kind of heavily customized that experience using the universal login flow. And yeah, I think just to call out, I think that customization allowed us to make sure that when a provider is signing up, they see a good, they see a different experience than when a patient is signing up through the universal login screen, where, for example, the patient will see the buttons to download the app from the Play Store and the App Store, right? So if I can I'll just walk you guys through quickly through that. So login, and yeah, so I mean, you can play around with the universal login for how your login page or how your login module will look, right? Or you can always do it how your password reset module, which I will walk through right now. And what will the users, how heavily can you customize the screen that the user will be seeing when they're going through the multi-factor authentication stuff, right? So over here, again, a lot of customization can be done without going into a lot of detail. So for example, I have these bunch of ternary operators that is just customizing the text for a sign-up flow for a patient and things like that. And also I have this little piece of code, what that does is it makes sure that once the if it's a patient and they're done setting up the password, that's the only time they see the buttons to download the app. So again, this was done entirely through Auth0. There was no separate set of front-end work that needed to be deployed or any kind of that thing. So again, just kind of echoing what I said earlier, that there were some issues with the styling here. So our designer himself just went in there and made some changes, and it was as easy as that. And I think the last thing that we've heavily utilized, and I think this is what Chris was speaking about earlier, is actions and flows, right? So what I spoke about earlier was the view part of all of this, but what about the logic, right? What about the logic that makes sure that when a patient has downloaded the app and they're getting on board to the application, they should go through the multi-factor authentication flow only once, right? Like Chris explained earlier, that we want some metadata from the database to get embedded into the JWT token, so that the front end, or I mean, when that JWT token gets sent to the backend, they can safely say that, okay, since it's coming from Auth0, we're not going to do any additional step of verification. So to do all of that, we've heavily used actions and flows here, and just to kind of give a quick demo around that as well. So yeah, the flows, the different triggers that you can use to create customized flows are through these, like, okay, when a user logs in, what do you want should happen, right? So you have a lot of flexibility. It's literally just like writing a good cloud function or some JavaScript code that you want to execute on login, pre-user registration, post-user registration, post-change password, and things like that, right? And what we've done here is, so for example, over here, right? So once the user logs in, what we want to do is we want to link all the different accounts of the user, for example. So in Auth0, when you sign up with your phone number, that's a different profile versus once you sign up with your email. And what if they both belong to the same person? So the linking of that, we're doing that on, like, we can handle that through this without writing any kind of backend. At the same time, just adding some more information into the JWT token that's returned. So just adding patient and provider ID. And this is the patient and provider ID of the actual database and not what's given by Auth0, so you get that flexibility as well. And for example, we've also done, we add a couple of flows for post-change password, right? So once the user is signing up, essentially they get a forgot password email that's disguised as a welcome email. But the next time when they actually do forget their password, we don't want them to see things like, okay, hey, welcome to Headlamp, because now they're already on Headlamp. We want them to see things like, okay, yeah, hey, you can forget, you can reset your password, something like this. So some of the flags that we need to toggle, we do it through this flow. And I think some of the other flows are, so for example, by default, what Auth0 does is that when you sign up, Auth0 will send a welcome email, but in our case, we want to send a forgot password email that disguised as a welcome email, right? So that's what we're doing through here. And if I just quickly show one of the, let me just quickly show. So yeah, this is literally, you can write all kinds of code over here. What we're doing is, it provides you a set of, it's a very feature-rich SDK that they provide over here to set a lot of things. So for example, if you want to set some stuff in your access token, you can do it here, and a lot of customization available here. So yeah, these are the three things that we kind of use very heavily to make sure that their entire onboarding flow of the application is handled through Auth0 without, and I think this entire flow, it took us less than a week to spin it up. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Cool, so yeah, Sujang.
Okay, cool, we're good. Yeah, so just continuing the conversation a little bit, how we're using Auth0 and Open Policy Agent, a different tool to help solve the auth use cases at Ketch. So for those who don't remember or know, Ketch is a privacy solution for our customers who are needing to comply with the myriad of global national privacy laws. We have a unifying platform where they can set up things like cookie consent banners. And also, as Vivek had described, if you go to Nike.com and you can ask them, I want you to delete my data, or I want you to return what data you have on me, our platform allows a way for our customer to configure that. So in solving that problem, we have a couple spaces where we need auth solutions. One is not too much different than all the rest of your apps. We need a place for our customers to log in. So this is the place where they might go and configure the color of their banners, or like go see all the requests that come in from their customers that want their data deleted, or they want a copy of their data. Separately, we have a spot where those people, Bob, whoever, wanted to get their copy of their data from Nike.com, you need to go log in and grab that from that spot. So that's a whole nother portal, a privacy portal. We have also a couple use cases where we have Auth0 flows, third-party integrations, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So the general problem, and I think it's not unique, as Chris went over, you have the user, they need to access the thing, whatever resource. We want a way to gate that access in a way that's easy for our developers to expand upon, and it's a scalable solution and secure. So our architecture at Ketch is set up pretty simply. We have the web browser front-end code makes HTTP calls to our API gateway layer. That's where I'll talk a little bit about where we're using OPA to help us with our auth solution there. And then from there, all our internal microservices, that communication is done over gRPC. So we'll double click a little bit about what's going on in the API gateway layer. And this is generally solving the problem of, in our Ketch console login, how we are making sure that our customers are accessing the right resources for their level of role. So the OpenID Connect flow, which we're using, is implemented through Auth0. Get this out of the box from Auth0. From the browser to the server, you put your login or username, password login. You grab the JOT from there with a secret. The JSON Web Token looks something like this. That returned back to the browser. You send that with all the requests to the API server. Stick it on the authorization header. Check the signature, pull some information from there, and send it back to the client. You can see it or you can't. So we're going to look a little bit closer at the spot here, which is pulling the information from the JOT and making sure that yes?
So this is the Auth0 server?
Yeah, so Auth0 is like facilitating this flow for us, as in they're hosting, like Arshil was saying, the page where you're doing the actual typing of the username login. They're sending out whatever emails if you need to, forgot password, all that. But where we plug in is where our front end is making the requests to the API server on number 4 with the JOT that Auth0 had issued. Yeah, but we're going to take a look at the step 5 here a little bit, and that's where we've implemented solution with Open Policy Agent. So Open Policy Agent, universal standard for policy authorization in the cloud, created by these guys, Styra. They had a ton of open source contributors. And they've since donated this project to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. It's a group of cloud guys doing cloud things. And they have so this project is used by a bunch of the bigwigs and out there and solving various use cases. We've implemented here in our HTTP gateway server. All of our backend is in Go, so it fit in nicely. This technology is written in Go, and it is pretty lightweight. Essentially, it's all in memories, so it plugs in very easily within our Go ecosystem. So how does it work? What is it? I guess you can think of it just like as a black box. You're sending it the request from the browser to our API gateway server, and it wants to spit out, like, are you allowed to see the thing or not? Like, you're Bob, you're an admin, can you see it? You're Sally, you're user level, are you allowed to do the write to that resource? So the request that comes in is the HTTP request, get users say. You pass with it JSON, so it's super embedded with JSON. All it speaks is JSON, JSON in, JSON out. And you can pass the information that's issued from that JOT token from Auth0, as well as the method and the path. We'll look a little bit at policy, the rego, in a little bit, but it has a copy of that, and it looks at the input against that, and from there comes up with a decision and says, as JSON, are you allowed or are you not? So we'll take a closer look at the policy, rego. So rego is their own language that was written to serve the purpose for Open Policy Agent. It's declarative language, and it is meant to be very good at policy declaration evaluation rules. So it's a little bit less verbose than if you were to write the same thing as JavaScript, say, but it follows this similar structure. The one thing is it's not imperative in the way that you're doing control flows, if this, then that. It's more like, are you allowed or are you not? And you can declare the rules in that way. It also is like a little bit cleaner to help do like operations that you might come up more often, like array access. So instead of typing out the whole path, it's a little bit more concise. But yeah, so I'll show you a mini demo example of what that looks like in action. So they have this playground. So this is the equivalent of if you're running this in your Go server, you might have like what this REPL is doing behind the scenes. The read, what does REPL stand for? Read, evaluate, play loop, yeah. So on the left is an example of the policy. That's like that thing in that diagram around here. So we declare, rewrite this guy, and that's what it looks like over here. So you set the default allow, and then this is snippets from how we've implemented it at our HTTP gateway. You can set up what roles and then what scopes are associated with those, and a very simple rule on who is allowed to access what. On the top here is an example input. So this is, we're passing through, with this request, it is a GET request. Here's the path split up into this array, and what claims scopes it might have. So this scope is what's pulled out of the JOT token. The JOT token, if you recall earlier from the flow, we're looking, this is the thing that was sent back from Auth0. It might look like this, like here's an example from our application. It has a ton of stuff, but we're just gonna have a simplified example. Yeah, so Auth0 issued this. This user has these permission scopes on their token. Let's parse that token and see if they're allowed to access that resource. So this information is pulled from there, and then you can run, evaluate, and this lets you test, but you would have it actually running in your actual systems in real life. On the output, you can take a look at, it has all the variables that were declared in the policy, but the thing that is important is the allow true. So you can say whether or not it's gonna be allowed or not, and it'll change here. So say this person is trying to get this object cookies, and they have a cookie read permission, so they are allowed to see it. But say that this is gonna be post instead. But they only have read permission, so it'll evaluate allow false. And then you can catch that in code and say if false, 403 access denied. But if there are additional permissions on the token, cookie write, at that point, it would be allowed true. So it's just a way to have a framework of taking that input and having a structured output. So moving on a little bit. Yeah, so we've used it in our use case with our HTTP server, but there are a lot of different extensions, and like once you learn the Rego language and framework, you can apply it to your different use cases. Here's a couple examples of how other people have used it. There are Kafka flows, SSH flows. So it's resource agnostic. It doesn't necessarily need to be implemented there. Yeah, so that's Open Policy Agent, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how we might be using Auth0 in slightly different ways from Headlamp Kapstan. One of the things that we found is that we started off with where we use it just for our general login, where our customers go in and change color of banner, say, But from there, there have been additional customer requirements or ways that the product has built out where we found it's useful and faster to use, as Harshal described, this very rich set of features that it offers to get what we need done more quickly. So not saying that the homegrown solution would be the only alternative, but I think a lot of times we would see that like building a lot of this stuff from scratch would be super hard and take a long time. And we found that there are a lot of like little ways, maybe unexpected ways, where having chosen this tool allows us to move quickly in other ways. Like one of them are customers, or we use adaptive MFA for a lot of our login, but there was one that wanted specifically, I want the stricter always MFA showing up. That's just like a toggle within Auth0. You can put some information. This organization has extra metadata. If that, then show the stricter MFA. Pretty quick to add, basically just toggle. There's a customer that wanted to integrate SSO. They use Okta, and building that all from scratch is hard. Doing it with Auth0 was fairly simple. I wouldn't say like extremely easy, but not as hard as doing it by yourself. As I mentioned before, we had a separate login for you as a consumer or customers wanting to get a copy of your data, say. So you need to go log in a separate spot. Like that separate spot to go build a whole auth system for that will take a lot of effort, a lot of time. But with Auth0, you can just do another, they call it application, and plug it in from there. And that auth system uses one-time password, which is different than our username password flows, but it's customizable to do what you want there. Another spot that we found it useful is we have the ability in that privacy portal to plug into your login. So like instead of setting up through the one-time password email, if you want to log into your Nike.com credentials instead, then if Nike were a customer, they could set up their own Auth0 server and plug in with our systems. To simulate that behavior on our half, we would need a mock Auth0 server, so you can go build that, or you can just use Auth0 stuff, and that turned out to be pretty useful. Another thing that's nice is that we've gotten a number of cross-cutting features out of the box. They have just logging and counts, user counts, engagement for free. Not that I haven't really looked at this directly, but like the logs has been helpful in the past. If it's like customers having some sort of issue, then you can go through and look here, and you don't have to build a whole nother system for that. Yeah, so that's kind of like the main core of what we wanted to get to. So we wanted to talk a little bit about like pros and cons, and so what. Also open up if people have questions or like comments of ways they hate Auth0. So some of the takeaways here, I think with Open Policy Agent, it is nice to have this framework, universal standard for what it looks like. The language itself lends itself to being declarative and more tuned to the policy needs. It maintains that separation where it's like runs as like this is the black box for authorization. It doesn't need to touch the rest of your code. And the open source community is active. The cons, it might be that if you have a simple enough use case, you don't need something as heavyweight as a new framework where you have to learn a whole new language for it. There might be alternatives in the use cases for policy agents. I think I've heard Kyverno might be something we'd consider to better suit our needs in the space of Kubernetes deployments. For Auth0, as we've seen different ways. There might be easy to implement and has a lot of flexibility with the custom flows. It's really nice to be able to offload that to a different provider, so we're like don't need to be auth experts just to get our app launched, which might have nothing to do with it, and focus developer hours, on building out your core business needs. Cons, some of the authorization capabilities might not be like specifically meeting the needs for the specific startup, and relying on this third party might be less than desired depending on what your use case is. And it might be that the features that they have are not one-to-one with what you need as well. But in the end, we, I think, found that in this space, it's been really helpful to use these tools. to help us move quickly and focus, not on becoming security authorization and any experts if it doesn't have anything to do with what you're trying to get out the door, and focus on delivering our core business functions. Yeah, meet industry pains without industry, meet industry standards without industry pains, and get back to getting our customers what they need. Yeah, that's about all we had. So we have some time for any questions. Yes.
Hi. So if you want to set up a different sign-up versus a login flow in Auth0, right now, when I was exploring, I could see that there's a login flow that they provide, and you can get the user to log in. But if you want an explicit sign-up flow with the explicit sign-up button, which has a different UI and whatnot, how easy or hard it is?
Yeah, so there are two things. Sign up kind of works in two ways, right? Either the sign up happens by the user himself, like the user themselves, and that's something which I mean, in Auth0, when you in Auth0 does not have an explicit way of like a separate screen altogether where the user will go and sign up, but the universal login allows you to customize how sign up will happen if they go to the sign up page from the login page, right? That's one thing. Second thing is, how do you want to configure your sign up if the sign up is not happening through the user? Like in case of Headlamp, patients cannot sign up. Patients need to be added by the provider, right? So in that case, when those actions and flows, they help, where we can say that, okay, how do you want to customize the experience by adding an action which is triggered by the post-user registration flow. And when is the post-user registration flow triggered? Either if you use the Auth0 SDK to create a member, or if a sign up happens, or even on the Auth0 dashboard, if there's a create user button and you do that, it's still triggered, right? So sign up, there's no special tab when you go to the universal login page, and there's no special tab for sign up, but within login you can kind of alter the flow, what happens when you click on the sign up button, and also you can customize it through actions and flows if through SDK a new user is being added through on Auth0. I hope that answers the question. Something is missing?
In the sense that sign up is a very, so okay, if you are signing up the way Headlamp signs up user, that's fine. But let's say if you have an explicit sign up button on your website, and somebody is supposed to sign up from there, right now the current way.
Yeah, it does not, yeah. I mean, you're right there, like I said earlier. And this is also maybe, I don't know yet, maybe there is, so I'm not aware yet, but I mean, as far as I understand, clicking on a sign up button that's in your application, that going to some kind of a page on Auth0 and having the sign up experience starting there, that seems, you know, that's not there, that I'll give it to you. But generally, I mean, this is what we've seen is that if you are using Auth0 for your sign up, then use it for your login as well, right? So that, just take the user to your universal login altogether, right? Why have just one sign up button in your app and have everything rest of the software? Yeah, does that answer? Yeah. Jason.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that we are using OTP with Twilio. So the first time they log into the Headlamp mobile app, they'll get a one-time passcode. So that's also worth thinking about right, because that just happens one time in the flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's integrated.
Yeah, so I mean, that's also one thing. The universal login may not be able to provide you with a lot of flexibility just for signing up, right? But if you're using a mobile app, if you're using web, their SDKs are solid, right? So the point is here to reduce a lot of developer time and effort that goes into doing all of these manual this manual stuff that you have to write to better the onboarding experience. But if you're, let's say you wanted to use embedded login, like embedded login is a term that they use that if you don't want to use universal login, right? So if you want to use embedded login, embedded sign up, their SDKs are extremely powerful to support most of the use cases that you can use. So again, yeah, I mean, you can do that.
Hey, so I had a question on maintaining different environments in Auth0, in the sense that generally you have a dev environment, a production environment.
Correct. So, initially Chris mentioned that all of this can be provisioned through Terraform, right? And in Auth0, there is this concept of tenants, where you can have different tenants for every environment, right? And this is how Headlamp does it. Maybe Ketch and Kapstan can shine more light on how they do it. But if we want to, we have a common we have a common Terraform repository with everything that needs to be provisioned into the tenant for different environments. And that's how we do it. Yeah.
So the customization on the email templates, etc., also that is also taken care. So your dev is in parity with your production on
exactly. Yeah. So it's like running your Terraform script, and the same script will now bump it up to a higher environment like staging, but essentially the infrastructure code is the same.
Fair enough. Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I just also wanted to add, you can essentially turn this all into Terraform modules and have it so that, just the few different variables, you can reuse the same code to spin up all these parallel environments. So it's super simple with Terraform, yeah.
Yeah, we're doing it through GitHub Actions. So if you have a different prefix for your staging environment versus in production or local development, you can just point all the different values in the JSON declaration, and then it'll spit it into their APIs deployment.
Okay, speaking of user onboarding, right? Let's say I'm a customer, I want one of your product, and I myself have my users, and I maintain my own authentication. Let's say I have Okta, and how do you onboard my request is, I need to, all my users who are on Okta, I don't want them to sign up. Can I go and onboard into your, whatever you're using, Auth0? Is there any such request have any of you faced during a customer call or something?
So I know in Auth0 you can have different quote unquote database or connection, whatever they call it, which is a set of users. So you can plug in, I think, to whichever user base. But I think we're just using our main one for Ketch users today.
So just to get your question right, you're saying that you have a separate set of users that are already on your platform.
So basically the organizations will have some sort of single sign-on. If I buy multiple vendors, I don't want my users to sign up on each of the products.
Exactly. So yeah, so I think that's one thing again, which just to echo what she said, that you can have something what they call as connections, which are essentially user databases, right? Where if let's say, we can always, so for example, if let's say I have an action written which is pre-user registration, right? If the request comes in saying that, okay, someone's trying to sign up, right? And if you don't want that user who's already a part of some other database to sign up, you can simply add your manual logic there to prevent that from happening, if that was your question.
I just want my users to just to prevent authenticating in each of the vendors I
you want to prevent authenticating?
Yeah, because let's say my org has Auth0, and it enables single sign-on, and if I go for any of the vendors, and if the users within my org, I want them to avoid signing up to each of those vendors. Is that a request, or any such kind of request came up from any customer?
Are you talking about single sign-on?
Single sign-on.
So I am signed into my Okta. I come to Kapstan. I don't need to sign in again. I'm already logged in. I don't need to log in again. It's talking about single sign-on.
We haven't implemented single sign-on yet. I believe they do have features, but I can't personally speak to that. I'm not sure if Ketch or...
I think we explored with the sign-in with Google, like basically Google's user base, so you don't have to create a separate account. But I think, yeah, since then we haven't done it fully. But yeah, Auth0 has all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think I think single sign-on. So you're saying that if I've already SSO'd with Okta, the user shouldn't have to go through an authentication again for your application, right? So I think that you can possibly add that as an separate SSO inside Okta, but again, like, I'm not very sure of how to do that, but I'm pretty sure it can happen because I've seen other products do it with Auth0. So, yeah, we're done. I think that's all.
Thank you, everybody.